Hi folks, how y'all doing? In this video here, I'd like to discuss the connections between the Pierce bloodline and Aleister Crowley. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with who Aleister Crowley is slash was, he was one of the founding members of the occult and Satanism during the 1900s. Ozzy Osbourne wrote a song about him. Jimmy Page lived in his house in Scotland, and this guy just was really an evil guy. In fact, his one of his nicknames, if you will, during the time he was alive was the wickedest man on earth, which certainly was high and running for that title during the 1900s, I'd say. And to sum up Crowley's philosophy in one sentence, it was do what thou wilt, which essentially means if it feels good, do it. Do whatever you want. Okay. And if you're interested in the doctrine that Crowley published about the occult, there's a lot of information out there about him. But I guarantee you, whenever you read it, it'll make the hairs on your neck stand up. This guy was just a weird dude, to say the least. Okay. So, going to the Pierce bloodline and how it's connected to Crowley. We have Pauline Pierce, who in the 1920s was close friends with Aleister Crowley. And this is documented, by the way. So Pauline Pierce was close friends with Aleister Crowley, and she went over to Europe during the 1920s. And here, when she was in Europe, she engaged in a ritual with Crowley known as Ordo Templi Orientis, better known as OTO. Now, part of OTO is a sex ritual that that Crowley would involve a lot of women in, a lot of his women followers. It's part of his I don't know, his new cult or what have you. So pretty much what happens is Pauline Pierce goes over to Europe, engages in OTO with Crowley, comes back from Europe pregnant. Okay, now here's the kicker here. Pauline Pierce did not go to Europe with her husband Marvin Pierce. And this is where it gets better. Pauline Pierce's daughter is Barbara Bush. Yes, the daughter she was pregnant with when she got back from Europe. She was pregnant with Barbara Bush. Yes, that Barbara Bush. And Barbara Bush, as we know, goes on to marry George H.W. Bush, and they go on to have George W. Bush. Okay, so I'll say that again. Pauline Pierce, in the mid-1920s, goes to Europe, engages in OTO with Aleister Crowley, and mind you, she goes to Europe without her husband, Marvin. When she comes back to the United States, she's pregnant with Barbara Bush, and we can clearly see who the father is if Marvin Pierce didn't go with her. All right. So my point I want to get across is George W. Bush is the grandson of Aleister Crowley. Yes, I'll say it again. George W. Bush is the grandson of Aleister Crowley. If anybody doesn't understand, I'll walk you through this again. We have Ordo Templi Orientis, OTO, which is a part of that was a sex ritual that Pauline Pierce engaged in with Aleister Crowley during the 1920s. And mind you, she goes over here without her husband, over to Europe. She comes back off the boat from Europe, pregnant with Barbara Bush. Barbara Bush goes on to marry George H.W. Bush, and they go on to have George W. Bush. That's right. George W. Bush is the grandson of Aleister Crowley. I say again, George W. Bush is the grandson of Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley was the man who proudly boasted himself as the Beast, 666. And his grandson is the former president of the United States. Think about that.